Okay, I would like to welcome everybody to the Art of Virtual Leadership, Leading Remote Workers, and Managing Virtual Teams in the Anywhere office. Again, my name is Phil Montero.
And my name is Jason Montero.
And we are workplace consultants. We have spent the past 13 years coaching and working with individuals and companies of all sizes and all different industries. And basically what we do is we teach people how to work together while apart. And through that time and with that experience, we have developed an approach to this kind of work that we call creating the Anywhere office. And basically what the Anywhere office means to us is the ability to work where and when you want, and to be able to meet with and collaborate with people across the globe as seamlessly as you do if they were across the table or across the
when we're asking these questions, maybe the most fundamental or foundational question we can ask is, what does your ideal team look like? It can be difficult to recognize success if you haven't sort of defined what success is on the front side. So when we start to ask these questions, and again, this is like when you ask yourself this question, you may also want to sit down and ask your team this question. What would one quality be of the ideal virtual team?
Same time zone.
in the same time zone. Okay.
Good mind reading skills.
For the first one, same time zone, I'm going to put, or at least work like it. Because obviously you don't have the control necessarily to determine whether the team members that make up your team are going to be in the same time zone. But again, I think if you use your technology and you have the right kind of guidelines and some of the things we're going to be talking about correctly, then the time zone should be more seamless in the way that some of that collaboration can work. And then someone else said good mind reading skills. And while that probably was a bit tongue-in-cheek, I think that brings up, again, another point, which is that somebody hit on before, which was the priorities being out of sync. If your team is working effectively, then you should be aware of what the priorities are, how each other thinks, the work style, some of those things that we talked about before, and that would lead to a team that works more seamlessly together, because that is something that can often get disjunct when you're working virtually. A series of important questions or guidelines that I think are important to have, which are communication guidelines and team guidelines. It's interesting, communication is such an essential part of this, but very few managers and teams have communicated about how they're going to communicate. And I know that sounds a little silly, but we take communication so for granted because it happens so naturally. And when we are co-located, we see each other in the office and we pop our heads in and have those visual cues that we don't really often think about the process of communication. And you'll find that some of the strategies or some of the best practices that we're going to share with you over these 2 days may seem like common sense to you, but there are often common sense that are not commonly applied.
And what your team needs and what you need and what you do in terms of information, communication, and collaboration. And you're going to find overlap in these categories, but as you start to sort of break down your team's tasks and what it is you're working on and what it is you're collaborating on into these areas, you can start to better determine how you're going to make sure that your team has access and the ability to do these three things effectively.
Yeah, and I think this, again, comes back to something that Wayne had mentioned, which is those tools, and somebody had said, different people having access to different information. Your communication needs aren't just a matter of those tools and the business process, but also your needs for formal versus informal communication. And informal communication is often overlooked, the importance of that water cooler talk and some of that informal communication that happens on a team naturally when you're in the same location. And while a lot of people say, that's really not important, what's been found in study after study when they look at virtual teams and the points that make them successful or not successful is that trust building and knowing the other team members is really one of the essential points that makes a successful virtual team versus a not successful.
We look and we think that the myth is going to be that technology is impersonal, that it's going to be difficult for people to bond and get to know each other because they're not in the same office. And again, the reality of that is that there are methods of doing that, but sometimes even if you have an effective tool in place, it is difficult to get people to use it. So I think anybody who's seen sort of traded the digital photographs of the grandkids with the grandparents, or been on a MySpace or a Facebook or some of these social networking sites, you see that it can advance our relationships. Some of this technology can advance our relationships with people even though we don't get to see them. It can be better than it was when all we really had was phone call and mail and maybe email. It has really grown in a lot of ways, these using these digital connections with people. What happens is that your management skills and your team starts to improve beyond just now we're meeting the challenges of working as a virtual team, but what you may discover is that your management skills for both on-site and off-site team members start to improve. What you're noticing is that your communication improves over when you were all in the office together, that people are less distracted, that there's less interruptions, that there's more trust, or the trust is richer, that your team is built stronger than the team when you were all on site and you were sort of letting that stuff happen unconsciously and maybe not coming back to some of those fundamental principles that we start out exercising but then sort of let fall to the wayside, that you make sure you're having those one-on-one communications.
The downside is that most organizations don't have a plan or a strategy for how they're going to work this way, or that thought, and haven't discussed how they're communicating, what information they need, and that collaboration, which is why we stress and kind of worked you through that workflow process. It is really important to take a step back and ask some of these questions that may seem fundamental. What are our guidelines? What forms of communication are we using? All of those things we talked about, those questions. What makes an ideal virtual team? How do we run our meetings? Is this the most effective way? What technologies are we using, and are we using them in the most thoughtful way that we could? And by asking these questions,